Hello everybody. I'm out here at my daughter's ranch where some of you have seen, I've made some videos out here before, but I figured I'm out here today. Now look at all the appliances. That's Lou. Say hi, Lou. She don't want to be on video. But we were discussing a lot of, maybe about 3 weeks ago, my daughter was at my house in Corpus, and they're looking on a lot of the different videos and websites about how to become politically active, how to challenge the system. Now, I didn't watch the videos. I was walking around my house doing stuff, but I heard just from listening what they're watching on the laptop, I said, oh, that's a lot of social justice issues, a lot of things I talk about on the videos. So as I was sitting here, we were having discussions, like, what about conspiracies and things like that? So I said to Becky and Lou, I said, look, how about we'll do a little forum that when I come out, you guys can, if you want to be active, we already have the little website and all the YouTube videos, which you all know are the most professional YouTube videos you've seen on the internet. So this is a little discussion, but we're talking at the little town. I'm not going to talk too much about it. You all seen a video of me talking about Alice once. But Alice happens to be a little town that's right over here. We're outside of the city limits. But I worked in a little town called Kingsville, the same, almost exactly like Alice. These little cities, about 30,000 population. Alice, the city of Alice, was in a boom because we had the shale oil boom here in this region. And so Alice was bringing in a lot of income. Their economy was really doing good. But I told my daughter a few years ago, because Becky and Lou used to work for one of the oil field services in Alice. And I told them a few years ago, I said, they're all going to start going out of business because of what's happening in the world economy right now, and with oil and so forth. And sure enough, Alice is now, kind of heading for bankruptcy, and they got certain scandals going on over there and things. So we're discussing, like, who runs the show? Who runs the show on a national level, on a local level? Do you know, I just thought of this. Have you ever heard of George Parr? Becky? Lou? I'm surprised. Okay. George Parr, I'm pretty sure I got it right. I've never studied George Parr, but this is famous for this area. But there's a county right around here. It's not the one we're in. We're in Jim Wells County. There's a county, Duval County. But George Parr was famous for super corruption, like, killing people and all these things. And that was very, very famous for a lot of corruption and all. And so there were, there's areas where we live here in South Texas that you have a lot of that. So I told them we're going to just I'll do a little video, talk a few things. Becky, do you want to say anything? What about some of the stuff? What were the videos you were watching the other day? I'm going to put Becky on. They're not all ready for videos. What were the ones the other day when you were at the house, my house? What were the videos you were watching on the laptop?
Oh, the Represent Us?
I wasn't sure the name of it.
It's the Represent Us movement.
Okay, Represent Us? Is it what it's called?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a grassroots movement to try and get corruption out of the politics as far as money goes, trying to limit contributions for super PACs. Well, basically get rid of super PACs and only allow PACs and have them all be regulated like regular PACs and limit on their contributions. And as far as state, federal government goes, but as far as local government, they try to work with the grassroots to get everything, trying to get laws passed locally, and then hopefully we can get local leaders that support these anti-corruption. The Anti-Corruption Act is what they're trying to pass federally. Get local people, and then it grows from there, and try to get state, and then trying to get the United States to do the Anti-Corruption Act.
Now, what I've been talking about on some of the videos about the current politics that are going on right now, I'm not a Hillary Clinton supporter, but I've tried to kind of be fairly fair. But one of the things about the Democratic side right now. As I make this, I always put the date on. I find it funny in this sense. The media narrative, those of you that watch my videos, I talk about liberal media bias. When I do that, I'm not saying that I'm not liberal in some ways, because I am. Nor am I'm conservative on some, liberal on some. But the liberal media bias, you could be watching the news, like I watch the world news at night, and you could see story after story questioning a candidate. Now, maybe what they question on the candidate is, maybe you could legitimately question. The piece they just did in the New York Times on Donald Trump, which has got a lot of, because they interviewed a bunch of Donald Trump ex-girlfriends and the girls that he knew at the pageants, which Trump did, the beauty pageants and all. Well, they did a story that made it look like this guy behind the scenes is really, bad and rude. Well, some of those women have come out the last few days and denied it. They said, we're mad because the New York Times, we made them, when they interviewed us, the women said, we told the reporter from the New York Times, we want you to know that Trump was very respectful. He never did anything wrong. And the reporter for the New York Times said, okay, I'll report that. But in the story that came out, the New York Times spun it. They basically shaped the story. They used excerpts of what the women said, but they didn't give the right context. So those women on their own, the last few days, have come out and said, you spun what we said. So that's what media bias would be. It's not so much that you out and out come out and tell a fake story, but it's what people focus on. One of the things about super PACs and about what happens to Sanders and Clinton, remember the date. So just yesterday, last night, you had two primaries. You had Oregon and Kentucky. I told people all along Bernie Sanders is easily going to win Oregon because it's much more aligned with his ideas. But Kentucky, it's right now, they're still counting the final votes and they're calling Hillary the winner by maybe a few. But the people, the news the last week, the Bernie Sanders voters feel like they are so screwed by the Democratic establishment, the people that wanted Hillary to be coronated as the nominee. They started getting violent the last 3 days, and there were death threats. Now look, I read CNN News, and some of the people on CNN, some of the top stories were, they're complaining of death threats from other Democrats that are very upset about what's going on. Talking about super PACs and money. A lot of the Bernie Sanders people, which are small supporters, he finances his campaign through average of, under $20 contributions. And of course, Hillary is she is connected to the Wall Street and all these other things. But Hillary was making the case, it will not affect me. She said, even though I have all of these, connections, it will not affect me. But that argument doesn't work well because the argument that many of the younger Democrats and even Republicans are making is, you might say big money does not affect you, but we are rebelling against that whole thing of big money being involved in campaigns. So Hillary's argument is, prove how it's affected me. Prove look, that nobody's really listening to that argument because it's not an argument of whether the money affected you or not. Because you are accusing the Republican side of the same thing, in essence, that the big money, they're behind all the corporations and the oil industry and all this. So that argument is a silly argument. Trump, what he did, and I know there's a lot of critics of Trump, and my daughter was also questioning, doesn't support Trump, but what he did was something that was unique. He did what Newt Gingrich, when he ran for president, wanted to do. Gingrich is an intellectual, and there is some talk that Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House, there's some talk that he might be on the ticket with Trump as a VP. Now, Gingrich always believed when he was going to run, and he did run. He didn't win, but he ran. He said, we live in a new day of social media. He said, the old concept of buying ads, putting those ads on TV commercials, going out, doing what John Kasich was trying to do, doing a lot of meetings, a lot of home meetings, and meeting everybody in the different states. Gingrich said that we're in a new day. Now, Gingrich was right. And I remember he started a website, and I think he paid like $1 million for a site that you could have started yourself. But at the time, he was not technologically knowing everything. But he said, and nowadays, if you're going to do an election, you do it through tweets, you do it through... That's what Trump did. This is the story about Trump is he was outspent by millions and millions of dollars, and the normal campaign advisor would tell a candidate like Trump, you can't be getting on Twitter at night and flipping off like that. He did that. And he broke just about every rule that the establishment candidate would do if he was trying to win. And a lot of critics said, oh, you're going to go under, you keep flipping off at the mouth like this. He did what Newt Gingrich, and I heard Gingrich make a comment the other night on the news. He said, yeah, Trump basically accomplished something that threatened the establishment, because they threw a lot of money. The Republicans that were fighting Trump, there's what's called the Stop Trump movement. It's still going on right now, but it's probably going to be dead in the next few days. But there are a few Republicans that Mitt Romney's won, and they say we must stop Donald Trump at all costs, because if he becomes, he's going to become he's like 90 short of the delegates. He's the Republican nominee right now, basically. But they wanted to stop him, but he was also a threat to the system. You see, he was a threat to the system because he did not do it the traditional way. He spent a lot less money, but he got a lot of advertising. How? Because everybody, the media, for the most part, in our country it's more entertainment than real. CNN has been doing a good job on some world things I've been discussing. So how did Trump play it? He simply put out a tweet. CNN, every news show that night's going to show that tweet. Now look, he sat down at his computer, which cost him no money. He puts one little tweet out, and that tweet goes on every news thing that day. How much money in ads would it cost you to get that tweet out if you bought airtime? You're talking hundreds and hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars to run ads. But the one tweet that he would put out got all that play because we live in a new time. So I think the money, and that's where we're discussing a little bit, the super PACs and all, the money is not going to play the same role, even if they can't say we're going to regulate the super PACs and all. It doesn't make a difference because we live in a new time. You see, we have social media. The same thing with news. In the old days, there were a lot of news stories. I remember when I was in New Jersey a few years ago, and I just flew in, and I knew there was a top story. I forgot what it was, but I knew as soon as I landed in New Jersey, oh, I'm going to get to my mom's house and put on Fox and CNN. Well, sure enough, it might have been right on the weekend, and I'm going through all the channels, headline news, Fox News, CNN News, but because it was the weekend news cycle, that top story, I forgot exactly what it was. Maybe it was something having to do with Syria. They didn't have no coverage on it. Now, of course, on the laptop, I didn't think I had an internet connection at the house at that time. I have it now. But I couldn't access the news. I said, now, if somebody like the older generation did not have online access to actual news, and they just were dependent upon the mainstream media, they wouldn't have even heard about that story because it wasn't showing. It wasn't on any of the things. But nowadays, we live in a time where you go right like I do daily. I go to all the news sites, local sites, and world news sites. So we have an information thing that's been taking place. And some people are critical of it because they say, well, Drudge Report and others are going to hurt it because they're conservative. But either way, we're living in a new time. All right, now, the Trump thing. Let me mention a few things about the Trump thing. Donald Trump, like any other Republican nominee, and I said this before, he might have said things about we're going to build a wall or whatever we're going to do. Presidents are fairly limited in what they can do because, as President Obama would testify, if Congress doesn't agree with a certain thing you're doing, you're not really going to get that done. But the president, I think out of anger, President Obama started saying, well, he publicly said this the last few years. He said, if Congress won't work with me, I'm going to do executive orders. Now, executive orders are very limited, but they're things that presidents can decree and say, we're going to decree something. What's the most recent one he did? The thing on the Justice Department just sent the memo to the states about the gender-neutral bathrooms. Well, it became a big political thing, and the states are basically, North Carolina was the first one that sued the Justice Department. But the states are arguing this. Not all of them, but some of them. They're saying, regardless of your belief on it, the states are saying the president doesn't have the power to interpret the civil rights laws that are good laws that we have in this country and then to apply them to a gender identity. That's some of the challenge they're doing. They're saying because by executive order or by the Justice Department sending things like that out, they're saying you've overstepped your bounds. So whatever a person's political belief is on the whole bathroom issue thing, some are saying it's not that, we're just challenging the power of a presidency because our country does not have what other countries have, which are kings, literally, and our country's different, our form of government. So there's challenges to that. So if Trump got in and people said, oh, he's got all of these, look, you get, the presidents are limited. And I think Obama started doing the executive order things because it doesn't really change a lot. For instance, he did something on the minimum wage. He says, Congress is not going to raise the minimum wage. So he did an executive order just a few years ago. But he did it only on federal employees. But it made big news. But that's very limited, and it had no effect at all. But it made big news, so people do things for political. All right, get some. I want Becky. It's your thing.
Oh yeah.
I want
no,
you
I was
now.
just saying that's why they didn't raise the minimum wage then for locals, for statewide. I heard about that. I
States.
We're going to raise it.
Okay, states on their own can have. States cannot have a lower minimum wage than what the federal minimum wage is, but states can have a higher minimum wage. So when the U.S. government says, for instance, I think New York City and one on the West Coast just passed a law for the state, and the minimum wage is going to go up to like $15 an hour or something. And they're going to try. So states can have a higher minimum wage, but there's a federal minimum.
Yeah.
And so many states, I believe Texas, we're at the federal minimum wage. I don't remember exactly what it is right now, but $7 something an hour, I think the federal minimum wage is.
Okay, because it's $7.25 for Texas.
Well, that Texas doesn't. Yes, Texas is the minimum wage for Texas is the federal minimum wage, and most states, I believe, have it about what the federal minimum is. But if the federal government ever raised that, yes, then it would apply. But that has to go through. That has to go through Congress. The president can't just do that on his own. So when Obama did it on his own with an executive thing, it was only federal employees. It wasn't every actual minimum wage. But why did he do it if it didn't have hardly any effect? I felt maybe he was frustrated that he felt Congress has not been working with him on anything, and so therefore he exerted himself. Some people think in the most recent issue, which was the bathroom law, the Justice Department sent out a memo to all the states and basically said they can't force the states to have gender-neutral type bathrooms or gender identity type bathrooms. They can't force them. They know that. But what they said in the thing that came out, the letter that went to the states was, we can withhold federal funding from the schools. Every state gets so much money for federal funding for schools, Texas as well. And they said, if you don't comply by this rule, we might withhold federal funding. Now that was almost a threat. Why would he get into it in that way, which got a lot of states mad, not just Texas. Texas actually immediately said we're not going to go by it and we're going to challenge it. But North Carolina was the first one that entered this. The states, that's like a threat, and when it goes to the courts have already ruled against the Obama administration, because this happened with something else with the Medicare and Medicaid. So it gets a little technical, but there's like a power play. In general, presidents are limited, and so people that are afraid, a certain person gets in. I find it sad or ironic that Hillary Clinton, she was Secretary of State. And as Secretary of State, that's her experience. They have a lot of years that go back with Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton, all the way to the days of Arkansas when the president, former president, was governor of Arkansas. There's a lot of scandals, and they were not all made up. And Hillary Clinton became famous at one time. She said, there is a vast right-wing conspiracy that are trying to get me and my husband. Okay? Maybe she honestly believes that. But if you looked at Hillary Clinton's record of what happened when she was Secretary of State in world affairs, I think any honest analysis, before I turned the video on, I was talking to my daughter Becky about the situation in Russia, in Libya, in China. Things are more destabilized than we have ever had in a very, very long time. And all of that did happen under Hillary Clinton's watch when she was Secretary of State. And the situation with the Benghazi thing, which the media has portrayed as it's a witch hunt. What happened in Benghazi, I'll do a really brief thing here. A few years ago, on the northern border of Africa, there were these three countries right there, and one is Tunisia, one is Libya, and one is Egypt. Now, they all border each other. Tunisia, just a little teaching here, Libya, and Egypt. And in Tunisia, there was a street merchant, somebody who sold stuff on the street, like you'd go to anywhere, little fruit stands. But in Tunisia, they took advantage. The authorities, if you will, even the police, they took advantage of those street merchants, and they made them sort of like what the mafia used to do. You want to open your pizza business, you're going to pay us money. That's what corruption did. And this street merchant got tired of that, and he lit himself on fire. He said, I'm so tired of this corruption. He burnt himself in the streets of Tunisia. Okay? Tunis, in Tunisia. Well, that's called self-immolation. And self-immolation, setting yourself on fire, has actually been an act of protest before. But it's a radical act of protest. It says, I'm going to get attention to the corruption, and I'm going to kill myself by burning myself. And if this, but believe it or not, that government in Tunisia, because of that single act, changed. And it sprouted what we refer to as the Arab Spring. Okay, it's a few years back. Well, they had protests, and they actually had a successful change. By that man's act of burning himself, they had a successful change in Tunisia. Now, Egypt, this began what was called the Arab Spring at the time, which I was in support of, which meant many of these Arab countries, and some people were confused because Egypt, Libya, and Tunisia are in Africa, okay? And you say, my friend John, who's kind of knowledgeable, John Montgomery, we were talking about Syria yesterday, and he thought Syria was in Africa. I said, no, John. And he's smart, John. I'm surprised. He said, no, Syria's not in Africa. I said, Egypt is in Africa, Libya is in Africa. So some people confuse it, okay, because it's a continent, Africa. Now, in Egypt, we'll see how long we go. This will be the first of our little talks, because I can't get a word in edgewise here. Egypt started doing the same thing. The people in Egypt, the younger generation, they also wanted to do the protests. And at that time, the man that was in charge, his name was Hosni Mubarak, and he was pharaoh, if you will, or king of Egypt for maybe about 30 years. But he was also like oppressive. So they started protesting, and there was a famous protest in Egypt, and it was in a little square called Tahrir Square. So they protested, and you had uprisings.
I remember that. Yeah.
Okay, and then there's a lot more I can do in Egypt. The Arab Spring fell apart, okay? There was a lot of hope in the younger Arab world. All Arabs are not Muslims, okay? But many of them were Muslims as well. But some of the younger kids in these countries really wanted a change. And do you know what sparked a lot of their belief that we're behind the times, we need change? Facebook and social media. Look, a lot of kids lived in those countries for many years, and they never knew what the other world was like. But when the world started getting connected through social media, a lot of these younger kids, they were getting on Facebook, they were getting on just like we do, and they said, look at the world. It's different than what we experience living here in these countries. And that, a big part of the unrest, which was a good unrest, they said, we want better for ourselves. All of that fell apart. Everything they wanted fell apart. It didn't work. In Libya, I could do Gaddafi, what happened in Libya. But the people themselves, they did want a revolution. They wanted to change. They wanted change. They felt a lot of the United States and the Western world had alliances, which we do, with a lot of leaders in those countries, and that we backed up those monarchies, which we're doing right now, even in Saudi Arabia. And we backed them up for personal means. Saudi Arabia, they don't elect those leaders. That's a family, a monarch family over there. So these younger kids are smart. Now, ISIS. In the Western world, when we watch the news, I had people tell me this all the time. They said those ISIS kids, because they're kids that have joined that movement, they say their only goal is to chop off the heads of people that they don't agree with. That's not it at all. Many of these kids, many of these younger people that felt disaffected, that felt like our country, the United States, and even NATO, which is us doing things in the name of NATO, basically, they said, we're tired of it. Many of them said this. And we made a deal when we went into Iraq and backed the killing of Saddam Hussein, and then certain leaders went in and went out, and when we started backing up, Iraq right now this week is a disaster, and Baghdad, there's like yesterday was like 100 people killed in Baghdad, Iraq, which is capital. That's fallen apart. Libya this week is beginning to fall apart again, and we're doing a lot of air flights over Libya again. This week, a lot of this has fallen apart again. So a lot of these people got so tired of it because there's certain religious division in Iraq, Sunni and Shia. So some of the leaders that we back, the guy we're backing now, is on the different side. And the other side, that's a division in Muslims, they said the only way we're going to get a voice is we're going to join ISIS. Many of those people, many of the military fighters in ISIS were former military men under Saddam Hussein. They were part of the Iraqi army. Why would they join ISIS? Just because they want to kill people and chop heads? No. They lost their jobs. They had families. They worked as a military general under Saddam Hussein. They had stable lives. We went in, that whole thing got decimated. They lost their careers, their lives, and they were fighters. They were soldiers. The only thing they did, they said, we're going to go fight with ISIS. We're going to go get another job. Well, so many of them did it for that reason.
I would do the same thing.
Okay.
Probably.
This is the law. Yes.
Oh, no, I was going to ask too.
Ask.
Something about the grid, basically, the internet, the cable,
yes.
and phone line grids. apparently, I guess they're trying to. Some governor in one state is trying to basically get a free grid where telephone companies, cable companies that own these lines, they're trying to open it up to basically free enterprise. You're going to have to rent these cable lines out for at cost, so you can have competition, which is what America's supposed to be. It's just completely competition, because apparently in America we pay the highest rates for internet and cable and cell phones and home phones.
They did.
Yeah, like we pay like 3-4 times as much as everybody else, and ours is slower.
They did a regulation that got a little, it became a political issue, but became difficult to. The rise of the internet is really, a very tremendous thing that took place, and so they didn't know. The U.S. has certain laws. How do you regulate certain things? And they were applying some older laws to try to regulate certain things on the internet. But a lot of the free speech people, a lot of the conservative blogs and all, they didn't want the government getting involved in any regulation, because they felt like if the U.S. government starts regulating the internet, they're going to go after like the websites that are anti-Obama or whatever. But for the most part, that was a little debate. They did do some called for, some actually was so bold to, they didn't publicly say it, but I remember listening to a Republican. This was not Democrat, it was Republican. They said, and I'm sure the man never gets online, never uses the internet, because he was kind of floating the idea, I heard him say this a few times, that if we cannot stop the recruitment of, for instance, ISIS guys are being recruited online. ISIS has a huge presence online through many Facebook, social media, Twitter. Look, they do a lot through social media. And I remember one Republican was on a couple of news shows, and he kind of was saying, well, if we have to basically get rid of the whole internet, no internet, if that's what we got to do, to prevent terrorists connecting, well, that was unrealistic, but I could see that's what he meant. Now, I'm sure that would be like saying to many people, if we have to get rid of all of our freedoms to stop ISIS, well, nobody would say that in a normal term. But it showed me that man's ignorance, because free, in the old days, like I was discussing earlier, you might have had a very important news story that was real important. And in the older days, 25, 30 years ago, the only way the public would know about that story was if the people that, quote, run the news decided to put that on. So if you had maybe corruption in a city, Alice, Kingsville, Corpus Christi, and if it was real corrupt, and mayor stole $1 million, say, and murdered 30 people down the street and stole, and it was a big thing. And if there was a lot of corruption, like in the George Parr days, Duval County thing, you would think, oh, I'm going to watch the news tonight and see the water boil or, a big news thing. But if the news was limited to only the few news stations you watch on TV, and the people decide, I'm not going to tell that story about the mayor or whatever, they wouldn't tell it. And the public would not be informed at all. Yeah. But when you had the internet and you had the independent news, bloggers and so forth, the mainstream media could not get away with that anymore. Yeah. And then now look, I listen to Rush Limbaugh, conservative. I listen to liberal. I watch Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman, which is the most liberal news media, and I catch her on cable TV, if you will. So I listen to them all. But there have been many times over the years where Rush Limbaugh, who is the #1 talk radio show in the United States of America, Rush Limbaugh, there will be a certain news thing that he'll throw out, and the mainstream media would have not mentioned it. But because he mentioned it, and it got a lot of buzz amongst a lot of people that listen to the radio news, then they would have to talk about it. I'll give you a classic case. Brian Williams, and I joked a little bit about Brian Williams recently. Brian Williams, but I like Brian Williams. Brian Williams was the main news person for NBC News for many years, and he hosted. And in the media world and in the news world, if your job is you are the main person for the World News Tonight, the three main media, ABC, NBC, CBS, that's like the top job. If you're the news person for the world news. Well, what Brian Williams had was, there was a history of Brian Williams kind of making up stories. Now, he didn't make up real big stories, but they finally caught Brian Williams, okay? Now, if it were not for the social media that we have today, okay, nothing would have happened to Brian Williams. What Brian Williams made up was a couple of things they caught him on. But he liked to report from the field, meaning during the wars, some reporters would go where the wars had taken place, and he claimed that he was in one of the planes reporting during the war, and that the plane he was in was kind of shot down. And now he told that story on a couple of shows, like comedy shows on Jon Stewart and all, and they interviewed him, and he would say, "Oh, you know, our bird was going down, you know, our helicopter was going down." And now look, Hillary Clinton did the same lie, and the media, she's done it. She did the same lie, and the media doesn't talk about that, but I'm sure it's going to come up. Well, when Brian Williams first told that story, he said, I was with our guys in the field, and, you know, our bird was coming down. Some of the soldiers that day that were with Brian Williams, they put on Facebook, "You're a lying SOB, Brian Williams," like 8-9 years ago. I was in that plane that day, and some of my brothers and all, you know, we were injured, and it's a disgrace, Brian Williams, that... Now, one of the military guys posted that. NBC News knew that he was faking that particular story. And then finally, I mean, look, I didn't recently cover the whole, read this, but finally he was at some event, and again, he said, "I'm doing it in the honor of our men and women." Finally, because of social media and all, there was enough uproar where they realized he lied. He lied about it. And he wasn't in the one. He wasn't in the plane. And it was a little media thing that came up. But finally, he lost his position. They fired him, but he's back on NBC, but he's on the cable channel, MSNBC. So in the old days, they could have just covered it up. You see, if the soldier that was on the plane that day or the helicopter, if he called NBC News and others and said, "Wait a minute, Brian Williams, your chief newsman, is lying," they could have got away with just ignoring that. But it started getting popular on the social media sites and all. And so finally there was enough pressure, it was revealed. And so the media, the news organizations, in the old days, they could have not covered what they didn't want to. And just as an aside, just to show you the difference, you'd think I'm making that up about Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton did that. The thing that Brian Williams did, Hillary Clinton did. We have tape, video. This is not a secret. People that watch political stuff know this. She had claimed that one of the military planes was landing that she was on, or her plane was landing, and they took fire. Okay? And she said this a few times, meaning when the plane landed, when she was Secretary of State, that they were shooting at them. And she was like dodging bullets and all. This is what she kind of said. But then video came out about the day that plane landed, wherever she was given this type, same thing Brian Williams did. And it showed her like talking to some kids along the sidelines and all, and then they caught her lying about that. So she did the same thing. All right, today we're going long. This is just going to be the beginning of maybe if Becky and Lou want to discuss some of these types of little political issues. The Occupy Wall Street movement really, the name of the video you were watching last week and all, it's kind of the same thing. A lot of the younger generation are beginning to say, we don't want power, in the hands of just the elite, just the people that have all the connections. And that's a movement. And people don't understand. In a way, the Trump and the Sanders campaigns, regardless of the beliefs of Sanders or the beliefs of Trump, the reason they got such support was because many people are disaffected with the way things have been going. And they don't like the old way things are going, referred to as this is the establishment. So if people, I don't know if Hillary Clinton is going to win the nomination for the Democrats. I still believe she's going to get indicted on the Benghazi thing. Because Benghazi, I think I forgot to tell the whole thing. I got into Libya.
Yeah.
Benghazi, I'm going to tell this one real quick.
Yeah.
When Libya, what we did in Libya, I think was a travesty. I think it was wrong what we did. There was a general by the name of Muammar Gaddafi. Muammar Gaddafi ran Libya. Okay? He was the leader of Libya. Muammar Gaddafi identified with a lot of Libya is in Africa, okay? But the people in Libya, like Egypt, they're not black. When you think Africa, don't you think black-skinned people, okay? Now remember, Egypt is in Africa.
Yeah.
And if you look at somebody on TV that is Egyptian, you're not thinking African. If you looked at the people that were in Libya, or even Tunisia, those are not black-skinned people. The majority of the black skin are the southern part of the continent of Africa, the sub-Saharan, okay?
Yeah.
Now, Muammar Gaddafi, I can't do everything on him, but he had a certain belief that was a little strange. He loved black-skinned people. Not as a joke, not as a trick. This even came out after we got rid of him because he had made statements about certain famous black people. He had a certain belief like the black race, the black-skinned Africans were somehow more noble. Something about the black skins. Okay, now it might sound racist to you, but that's how he had viewed this. Now, when President Obama became president, the first black president ever, President Obama, I don't hate President Obama. I don't love President Obama. I think a lot of things he did were a mistake, and I don't want to blame any particular side here. But at one point in Libya, which Muammar Gaddafi was in charge of, there were uprisings. Okay, just like many other places, Syria and all. And when these uprisings started taking place, some of these people in Libya were also part of the same type of terrorist groups that we supposedly are fighting today, ISIS-type groups. Well, Libya started a battle, and it was on TV, and it looked pretty bad because one side's going against the other. And I mentioned this woman's name the other day. She's still with the United States government. I think she's now the ambassador at the UN. But her name is Samantha Power. Samantha Power was a more liberal woman, sort of like Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders' beliefs. She worked for the White House for President Obama. And Samantha Power had a belief, and I'm not saying it's a wrong belief, but some of these people said, our military shouldn't just be used to defend us, but we should also be involved in, if we think there's something unjust going on in another country, our military needs to be used also to stop an injustice. Well, in Libya, because the war was going back and forth, and Benghazi, back and forth, Tripoli, we involved ourselves and backed basically the killing of Muammar Gaddafi, which was the leader of Libya. Okay? And it was pretty disgraceful because he was killed. The video was on TV when Gaddafi was killed. All right, what does that got to do with the blacks? I remember Louis Farrakhan and Al Sharpton, other black leaders, when President Obama, who is black, took sides against Muammar Gaddafi, some black leaders in this country said openly to the president, "What are you doing? He's our brother." Why did they think that? Why did some black leaders in this country think that? Gaddafi had a belief that the black-skinned race, people of the sub-Saharan part of Africa, had a special calling. Look, Africa had a lot of racist leaders over the years in parts of Africa. Gaddafi was one that was not black-skinned and loved the black-skinned Africans. And they kept thinking, some of the black leaders in this country were thinking, President Obama, Muammar Gaddafi is one of our biggest supporters. There's racist leaders all over the world. He loves the black-skinned people, which he did. And you want him, you back in basically his murder. It didn't make sense to some black leaders, and it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But we did that, okay? And Libya became a disaster and a mess, okay, after we did this. Because even this week, it's fallen over again, going down. These groups, these basically militia groups have been running Libya, and there's no centralized government. But that showed you our involvement. And maybe President Obama meant well when we intervened in Libya. Maybe he meant well when we began intervening somewhat in Syria. Maybe George Bush meant well when he wanted to get rid of Saddam Hussein. But those countries, after we intervened, are much worse. And a strange thing about the Libyan fight, this became famous, the war, and it's still going on. But there were many black fighters in Libya that were fighting on the side of Muammar Gaddafi, and these were mercenaries that came from the southern part of Africa, sub-Saharan, and they were speaking French. I remember the reporters said, "Why are they speaking French?" Because of colonization of British and French and even countries. They had a history of other countries' influence on them, and they were colonized in the past. So they spoke the language of the country then. And it was strange. It was almost a sign. But they also asked some of those black militia fighters, "Why are you supporting Muammar Gaddafi before he was killed with our backing?" And they said this. This was on the news. They said, "He's not paying us. We coming all the way from the sub-Saharan part of Africa, all the way to Libya, to fight on the side of Muammar Gaddafi against the U.S. and against the others who are fighting him." And the reporters asked these black French-speaking mercenaries, "And you're not getting paid. You're mercenaries. Why are you not getting paid?" "We are doing it for free because he loves us. Because he stuck up for us when many other leaders of the African countries did not stick up for us. He stuck up for us." That showed you that he really loved the black people. The groups on the ground killed him. But that was a disaster what we did there. That was unjust what we did there.
Yeah.
And the blacks were fighting on his behalf.
That's great.
So that's a little history of that. And okay, anything else? This is our first video that we've done. Lou, I want you to say something. Don't you have anything?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks,
Lou,
Dad.
next time. That'll be it. We're going to end it. And maybe we'll do some little political. Maybe we'll do a little political things like this. And right now, I've been posting on when you get this video, but there's a lot of issues going on in Corpus Christi with the water boil. Oh, I forgot. I always tell a joke. Have you all ever heard any of my jokes on the videos?
Yeah.
Okay. I have been told that I have certain gifts. One is that I'm extremely smart. The other is I'm very funny, and my third strongest gift is humility. I'm very humble. Here is the joke. I heard it coming out to the ranch in the car. Now, you heard me talking about the water boil of Corpus Christi and all. I kid you not, and I even thought, oh, I'm going to have to tell this. On the radio, coming out here listening to my rock stations, of course, they're doing the updates on the water boil. I mean, I was in the car laughing because listen to this. Listen to this. The update on the water boil, meaning we have bacteria in the water in Corpus Christi, so you got to boil the water if you're going to drink it. I don't boil the water. I drink it anyway. But this is what the thing said. I swear, I am not lying. It said, this was the public information on one of the rock stations. It said, we are still under water boil. This is what it said. You must boil your water and then cool it before drinking. And I thought, how ridiculous. There's probably people that were boiling the water, and the city's worried about lawsuits, and they're saying, quick, tell them to cool it, because the next news will be Corpus Christi, Texas, after the boil alert, the only city in the U.S. that has 80% of patients in the ER with burnt esophagus and all. I'm like, obviously you're going to cool it before you drink it. But look, because of lawsuits, unless people were calling in asking, do we have to drink it when it's boiling? They did that. And I thought, so I'm going to title this Sheeple, the Sheeple. Special ad for the Sheeple. Okay, that's it. We're done. That I heard that. I was laughing. That'll be the title. I'm going to title this video, Cool the Water Before You Drink It. Okay. I hope you enjoyed this little politics we're doing.